Before this video even starts, I want to use this video as an excuse to promote something that I've been working on. I'm doing a comic series called Passages of Lovecraft, where I take quotes and passages from some of Lovecraft's most famous works, mainly in the Cthulhu Mythos, and adapt them into short little comics that you can read. This comic series contains some of my most risque and easily my most experimental forms of art. So if you want to see what my art looks like when all of my fucks are thrown away, and I try to draw something as scary as possible, then I think Passages of Lovecraft would be a comic for you. All links to my comics are available in the description below, and if you do like these comics, feel free to subscribe over on Webtoon, and stick around for future issues, with the next comic hopefully being made within the next 2 weeks, where I will be adapting The Hound. Thank you so much for listening to these little plugs, and with that, let's get on with the video. Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Manga Writer, and today I want to discuss something that has been eating up my imagination and a lot of my art as of late. That being the world of horror. And today's video is going to be discussing the branch of horror that comes from the works of the famous, or rather infamous, early 20th century author Howard Phillips Lovecraft, the man who popularized the genre of cosmic horror. While the impact of a work of horror depends entirely on who consumes it, all horror is based off of one determined factor: the fear of the unknown. This is something that has even been quoted by Lovecraft himself. Despite our massive leaps and bounds in understanding our world and how it works, there are still things that we do not understand. If I told you that as of this video being uploaded, we know more about the Milky Way galaxy than we do our own ocean, what would your reaction be? My guess would be that your reaction would be something between the lines of mindless interest to bone-chilling fright. This is where cosmic horror, or Lovecraftian horror to fit with this video's title, is at its best. Lovecraftian horror is built around how little we truly understand about the universe and the waters that surround our lands. The placid island of ignorance humankind lives on, despite being very advanced by our standards, is a tiny speck compared to the black seas of infinity that is yet to be explored. A sea that, if explored, would shatter the way we think of the world as we know it, the way we think of the sciences, each straining in its own direction. How the piecing together of disassociated knowledge would open up such terrifying vistas of reality that our minds simply cannot comprehend. A vista of reality that, if discovered and experienced, would either make us go mad from the revelation or make us flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. The cosmos and the ocean in Lovecraftian horror are not seen as wondrous and fascinating like in other genres, but overwhelming and dangerous. Blissful ignorance in this genre is seen as a blessing, while enlightenment is shown to be excruciating. The books Lovecraft wrote tell stories where people built on curiosity and fueled with adventurous purpose go on adventures where they endure constant assault on their senses, leading to intense suffering. These characters' worldviews shatter into pieces, leaving them as empty husks of their former selves, returning either completely mad, or in some cases, die shortly after. In the world of Lovecraft stories, the happiest characters are the ones who turn a blind eye to the supernatural and the insane. The most merciful thing in the world in this genre is the inability of the human mind to correlate all of its contents. Some things in the universe are just not worth knowing. You may be asking what it is about understanding the ocean and space that makes Lovecraftian horror so scary, and to understand that, you need only to read his books, specifically the ones contained within the Cthulhu Mythos, where we are exposed to the monsters. The monsters in the Cthulhu Mythos is where Lovecraftian horror is shown at its most horrifying. While classic horror monsters play on the familiarity of humanity, like Dracula, Jason, or Freddy Krueger, monsters in Lovecraftian horror go far beyond that. These monsters are not bogged down by things like physics or natural biology. Monsters in Lovecraftian horror defy the laws of life as we know it. Their appearances are more random, more confusing, and more alien. It would not be out of the ordinary for there to be a monster in this universe that has the head of an octopus, the body of a man, or the wings of a dragon. These designs sometimes go to even greater extremes with creatures like the Elder Things, creatures seen in books like At the Mountains of Madness and The Dreams of the Witch House. These monsters are described as being rigid, barrel-shaped monsters with thin horizontal arms radiating spoke-like from a central ring, with vertical knobs or bulbs projecting from the head and base of the barrel. Each of these knobs is the hub of a system of 5 long, flat, triangularly tapering arms arranged around it like the arms of a starfish, nearly horizontal, but curving slightly away from the central barrel. These monsters grow to sizes of 8 feet high, have a wingspan of 7 feet, and propel themselves by a spider-like wriggling of their lower set of starfished arms. In the book At the Mountains of Madness, the descriptions go even further than that. This insane assortment of parts is far different to the life we have here on Earth. These are monsters that lived and acted like animals, but have the appearances of deep-sea creatures, bugs, plants, or even sometimes not even those. The infinity that is outer space and the deep ocean mean that these monsters can sometimes be massive in size, and yet their anatomy makes no sense. You only need to Google Lovecraftian horror on Google Images to be exposed to creatures that take on a whole new meaning to the word horrifying. Monsters can be far more intimidating when the laws of the universe do not hold them down, or when looked at, cannot be understood. And that's what Lovecraft took full advantage of when it came to describing the Great Old Ones. To put it very simply, the Great Old Ones are a race of monsters that come from outer space. Their arrival on Earth can be shown in the book At the Mountains of Madness to be even before the dinosaurs, and even before the first walks of life. According to some folks, it's even been rumored that the Great Old Ones are the reason why life was created on Earth, and the reason was probably just a joke. Where they came from, why they are here, and what they look like, most people do not know, for no man had ever seen an old one in person without going mad. One of these more famous mad characters is the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred, the author of the Necronomicon, a book that contains most of the information about the Great Old Ones and other Lovecraftian monsters. People who know of the Old Ones simply know one thing.
The Old Ones were, the Old Ones are, and the Old Ones shall be. Not in the spaces we know, but between them. They walk serene and primal, undimensioned and to us, unseen.
The books sometimes provide us with some form of explanation as to what these Old Ones could possibly be made out of.
These Great Old Ones were not composed altogether of flesh and blood. They had shape, but that shape was not made of matter.
The Great Old Ones were so out there as monsters that the laws of the universe become twisted and out of whack, trying to give them form. This begs the question on something, however. If the Great Old Ones don't abide by the laws of science and the universe, where are they? The Call of Cthulhu explains the fate of most of them.
When the stars were right, they could plunge from world to world through the sky. But when the stars were wrong, they could not live. But although they no longer lived, they would never really die. They all lay in stone houses in their great city of Relier, preserved by the spells of mighty Cthulhu for a glorious resurrection when the stars and the earth might once more be ready for them.
Now this kind of story nowadays isn't really anything new. Many different stories in religion and other works of horror tell of a doomsday prophecy when the monster would get out and unleash terror upon the world. However, the old ones getting out tell a different story. Firstly, the old ones cannot get out by themselves. They need some help from the outside, who must serve to liberate their bodies.
The spells that preserved them intact likewise prevented them from making an initial move, and they could only lie awake in the dark and think whilst uncounted millions of years rolled by. They knew all that was occurring in the universe, but their mode of speech was transmitted thought. When, after infinities of chaos, the first men came, the great old ones spoke to the sensitive among them by molding their dreams, for only thus could their language reach the fleshy minds of mammals.
To get out, these monsters need the help of humans, and this is where the cult of Cthulhu was born.
These first men formed the cult around small idols which the Great Ones shewed them, idols brought in dim rays from dark stars. That cult would never die till the stars came right again, and the secret priests would take great Cthulhu from his tomb to revive his subjects and resume his rule of Earth.
So with all of this doomsday prophecy and cults appearing all over the world, what would happen if these great old ones got out? What exactly would become of the Earth? All is explained in the next sentence of this passage.
The time would be easy to know, for then mankind would have become as the great old ones, free and wild and beyond good and evil, with laws and morals thrown aside, and all men shouting and killing and reveling in joy. Then the liberated old ones would teach them new ways to shout and kill and revel and enjoy themselves, and all of Earth would flame with a holocaust of ecstasy and freedom.
If the old ones were to ever get out, everything we know about humanity would snap. We would return to our most primal and basic desires and live under the great old ones as rabid animals without a moral or guilty conscience. Proof of this savagery can be read in a couple of Lovecraft's works that revolve around the cults, which partake in acts that would make even the cults of reality cringe in horror. Here is a passage written once again from Call of Cthulhu. Sit tightly for this one, because this passage is going to be a bit longer than the other ones.
It was nightmare itself, and to see it was to die. But it made men dream, and so they knew enough to keep away. Only poetry or madness could do justice to the noises heard by Legras's men as they plowed on through the black morass through the red glare and the muffled tom-toms. There were vocal qualities peculiar to men, and vocal qualities peculiar to beasts. And it is terrible to hear the one when the source should yield the other. Animal fury and orgiastic license here whipped themselves to demonic heights by howls and squawking ecstasies that tore and reverberated through those nighted woods like pestilential tempest from the gulfs of hell. Now and then the less organized ululation would cease, and from what seemed a well-drilled chorus of hoarse voices would rise and sing-song chant that hideous phrase or ritual. Then the men, having reached a spot where the trees were thinner, came suddenly in sight of the spectacle itself. 4 of them reeled, 1 fainted, and 2 were shaken into a frantic cry which the mad cacophony of the orgy fortunately deadened. Legras dashed swamp water on the face of the fainting man, and all stood trembling and nearly hypnotized with horror. In a natural glade of the swamp stood a grassy island of perhaps an acre's extent, clear of trees and tolerably dry. On this now leaped and twisted a more indescribable horde of human abnormality than any but a sign or an agarola could paint. Void of clothing, this hybrid spawn were braying, bellowing, and writhing above a monstrous ring-shaped bonfire. From a wide circle of 10 scaffolds set up at regular intervals with a flame-girt monolith at the center hung, head downward, the oddly marred bodies of the helpless squatters who had disappeared. It was inside this circle that the ring of worshippers jumped and roared, the general direction of the mass motion being from left to right, an endless bacchanal between the ring of bodies and the ring of fire.
These cults are a look into the future of the Great Old Ones' revival. We would realize just how small and how insignificant we are in comparison to the greater beings the universe has to offer, and thus, humanity would go and do horrific acts just for the sake of one's ecstasy and worship of a higher being. The Great Old One's existence would be the final stepping stone into realizing that we aren't alone in this black sea of infinity. In Lovecraftian horror, there is something out there, and its mere existence makes humanity break with existential madness. This is why I personally find Cthulhu to be one of the scarier Old Ones. While his gigantic size and alien appearance would break me to my core, Cthulhu's role in the end of humanity is what scares me the most. This creature is the only thing keeping the other Old Ones contained in the sea, and if he gets out, Lord only knows what other things would come after him. But what I think is the scariest part of all this is that the Great Old Ones would not be at fault for humanity's downfall, for one simple reason. To the Old Ones, watching humankind is the equivalent to us looking at something like dust, something that when we see, we barely acknowledge, if at all. While the people of Earth would devolve into primal savagery on a global scale right under their feet, Cthulhu and the other Old Ones would simply walk the Earth as if we never existed. The Great Old Ones don't respect us. The Great Old Ones don't fear us. The Great Old Ones simply aren't interested. Now that you have the basic idea on who and what these Old Ones are, it's time to get to know more of the Lovecraftian universe. The Outer Gods, beings that are not contained within the walls of R'lyeh, for they are far too powerful. Beings that look at the Old Ones the same way the Old Ones look at us. Let me introduce to you some of the more famous Outer Gods. Gods that make the mighty Cthulhu seem insignificant. Yogseth, the key and the gate, the all-in-one, the one-in-all, mentioned through some of Lovecraft's titles and is a core plot point to the book, The Dunwich Horror. Yogseth is an outer god that holds the key to the gate, a gate that contains all knowledge about the galaxy and time itself. Yogseth has the key to the gate because he is the gate. Being a creature outside of our patch of reality, he sees and knows everything, everyone, and every time in history, even things that haven't yet started. Past, present, future, all are one in Yogseth. He knows where the Old Ones broke through of old, and where they shall break through again. He knows that they have trod Earth's fields and where they still tread them, and why no one can behold them as they tread. If you wish for great knowledge or perform an ungodly ritual, seek Yogseth, for he will tell and do all that you wish and more. That is, if you can pay the price, and you can handle the pressure. Shub. Yes, I know, her name sounds like a racial slur. Lovecraft was racist. I know, shut up. The fertility goddess. The black goat with 1,000 young. Only really mentioned by name throughout Lovecraft's works, like the Haunter of the Dark, the Dunwich Horror, and the Whisperer in Darkness. Shub is the goddess of fertility. She gives birth to many children who simply fall off her once they are born. Many go and wreak havoc onto the world of mankind, while some of her young simply reattach to her after some time. While she never made a true appearance in any of Lovecraft's work, at least the work created by him and not under a manager, Shub is the most worshipped according to the lore. The reason being, if I were to guess, to be the fact that she gives birth to old ones. If the thought of what the mother of the great old ones could possibly be ever crossed your mind, you can look towards a black mass of mouths and tentacles, all stood up by writhing goat legs, for an answer. Nyarlathotep, the Crawling Chaos, the Black Pharaoh. Nyarlathotep goes by many different titles, and has some appearances throughout the Cthulhu Mythos, most notably in the Haunter of the Dark, the Dreams in the Witch House, and most notably of all, a whole poem written by Lovecraft himself, which is named after this outer god. Nyarlathotep is far different to the other gods in the mythos. While the Old Ones and the other outer gods are usually written to see humans as nothing but ants and thus never really give them the light of day unless seeked after, Nyarlathotep is the only god who actually acknowledges our existence and revels in making us suffer. The poem documents Nyarlathotep's first spotting to be thousands of years ago in ancient Egypt, where he took the form of a pharaoh. People bowed down to him without really knowing why. In these ancient times, he would speak much of science, electricity, and psychology, and create strange things out of metal and glass, which he would use to show off his power to his people and build his following. Into the lands of civilization came Nyarlathotep, swarthy, slender, and sinister. Men advised one another to see Nyarlathotep and shuddered. And where Nyarlathotep went, rest vanished, for the small hours were rent with the screams of nightmare. From the times of ancient Egypt to the modern day where the poem jumps back to, Nyarlathotep cares for only one thing: to fuck with the world of humanity and make it go mad from things they will never understand. He is the only outer god that one could truly call pure evil. Azathoth, the blind idiot god, nuclear chaos, the cold one, and in my opinion, the scariest monster Lovecraft ever created. Azathoth makes very rare appearances, and when he's mentioned, he's brought up only in passing. In the story The Dreams in the Witch House, a book of Azathoth was signed, with the character refusing to go along for he knows how evil Azathoth really is. The thin, monotonous piping of an unseen flute, a big part to Azathoth's lore, is also mentioned, but not expanded upon. The main character Gilman has stated to have read in the Necronomicon about the mindless entity, which, quote, rules all time and space from a curiously inverned black throne at the center of chaos. Chaos is rumored to be around the center of all existence, so keep that in mind. Azathoth's name was also used to title young Darby's nightmare lyrics in The Thing on the Doorstep. His name was mentioned a couple of times in The Whisperer in Darkness, and originally was planned to have a whole book dedicated to him started in 1919, but Lovecraft never finished it. His only real appearance was in The Haunter of the Dark, which contains the most information we have of him and the function of the flute. The character in The Haunter of the Dark, Robert Blake, while going through a manic episode, thought of the ancient legends of ultimate chaos, at whose center sprawls the blind idiot god Azathoth, lord of all things, encircled by his mindless horde of mindless and amorphous dancers, and lulled by the thin, monotonous piping of a demonic flute held in nameless paws. The function of the flute is to keep Azathoth in a dreamlike state, making sure that he is always asleep. This, to me, is horrifying. You may be asking yourself, what is it about a sleeping god that makes this YouTuber so scared of that idea? Here's the thing about Azathoth that makes him different from the Great Old Ones and even the other outer gods. Cthulhu is responsible for keeping the Old Ones at bay. Yogseth is responsible for knowing everything from the past to the future. Shub is responsible for birth. And Nyarlathotep is responsible for excessive evil. What's Azathoth's role in the universe? It's the universe. Azathoth is responsible for life, creation, and existence itself. The reason you're here, the reason your family's here, the reason your planet's here, the reason your place in the universe is right here, Azathoth is responsible for that. Everything that space and time has ever known was dreamed up by Azathoth, a dream that has been bestowed upon the universe for millions, even billions of years. Azathoth is more than just an outer god. Azathoth makes even them look like children. Azathoth sleeps to the flute's sweet music that keeps his form cold and still, while existence powers on. If, by any horrid chance, Azathoth were to wake up, even for a couple of moments, everything would be gone. Existence would be no more. The lights would go out, and all that is the universe would return to Azathoth's mindless state, where it will probably never return again. When Azathoth awakens, all things will end, once and for all, and all will once again be Azathoth. Lovecraft's work is all about existential dread. It's fearing things that science can't make sense of. It's devolving into madness at the realization of one's inability to stop the inevitable. It's the anxiety of feeling that something horrid is coming, but you just don't know when. For all you know, the stars could already be right. These monsters could already be out of their great city, and are just living in the 95% of the ocean that hasn't been explored yet, and possibly slowly crawling towards us, without us even knowing. That kind of existential stuff right there is exactly why I find Lovecraftian horror to be so intriguing, and why it has been eating up a good bit of my life as of recent. My name is Manga Writer, and I hope this little video gave you a bit of perspective on what makes Lovecraftian horror so scary. And always remember,
Cthulhu's the target. Cthulhu's the target.